The flight was supposed to be ordinary. The passengers filed in one by one, rolling their suitcases through the narrow aisles, searching for their assigned seats. Sunlight poured through the windows as the airplane stood gleaming on the runway at Manchester, waiting to lift into the sky.
Yet, what unfolded that afternoon turned an everyday flight into a story that millions would never forget.
At the heart of it was a young girl named Emily, dressed in a simple white dress, her braided hair glistening under the daylight.
To the other passengers, she looked like just another little traveler.
But what they didn't know was that Emily was the only daughter of a reclusive billionaire, a man whose wealth could move mountains, yet who raised his child to value dignity and kindness over money.
Emily had been traveling with her godmother, Jessica, who accompanied her while her father attended urgent business in Los Angeles.
Before this story unfolds, if you believe in dignity, if you believe in the power of quiet strength, and if you believe that respect costs nothing yet can change everything, then please take a moment to like this video.
Subscribe to Third Person View and share it. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their inner strength. Your support helps us bring stories of resilience and human spirit to light. Jessica guided the girl down the aisle, pointing her toward her seat by the window, a spot Emily loved because she could watch the clouds roll beneath her as though she were floating in a dream.
But when they arrived at the row, a man named Richard, in a crisp white shirt and polished shoes, was already sitting there, his legs stretched across both seats.
He was casually munching from a bag of chips as though he owned the cabin.
His leather shoes rested arrogantly on the edge of the seat, clearly marked with Emily's number.
Jessica gently explained that the seat belonged to the little girl, but Richard didn't flinch. He smirked, tightened his grip on the bag of chips, and leaned back as if the world around him were his servant.
Emily, young yet unshakably graceful, stood silently, her wide eyes scanning the situation. Around them, passengers shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their gazes to avoid confrontation, while others whispered among themselves.
Nobody spoke up. Nobody dared. It was not just a stolen seat. It was the dismissal of a child's dignity.
Emily could feel the sting. Not because she was denied a chair, but because her worth was being trampled by someone who saw her as powerless.
What Richard didn't realize was that this little girl's father owned some of the very corporations that helped fund the airline itself. But Emily had been raised differently.
She wasn't taught to throw her father's name or wealth as a weapon. Instead, she was taught to stand with quiet strength, to let her actions define her.
The air in the cabin thickened as Jessica called for a flight attendant. The attendant arrived, her face caught between duty and hesitation, asking Richard to move.
He chuckled, refusing outright, saying he had already made himself comfortable and wasn't about to give up his spot for a spoiled kid. His words cut sharply, and the sound of them rippled through the rows.
Emily lowered her head, her small hands clutching the hem of her dress. But inside, something stronger than sadness was building, an unshakable resilience.
The murmurs grew louder as more passengers noticed what was happening. Some began recording on their phones, sensing the tension might explode.
The flight attendant called for her supervisor, who arrived moments later. Richard argued, raising his voice, claiming he had every right to sit wherever he pleased, that he had paid for a ticket just like everyone else. He waved his hands dismissively at Emily, calling her just a child who didn't matter. The arrogance in his tone made the cabin boil with discomfort. But then something unexpected happened.
Emily finally lifted her gaze. She looked directly at Richard, not with anger, not with fear, but with a calmness that silenced even the whispers.
Her voice was soft but steady as she said that her father had always told her respect costs nothing, yet it can change everything.
The passengers froze, struck by the maturity radiating from such a young soul. Richard sneered at her words, but his smirk faltered ever so slightly.
At that moment, the captain was informed of the altercation. Regulations required that no flight could take off amid unresolved conflict, especially when safety or passenger well-being was at stake.
The engines quieted, the crew announced a delay, and the plane remained grounded. What began as one man's stubbornness had now disrupted an entire flight.
People began voicing their frustrations openly, some shouting that Richard should be removed. Finally, security officers were called onto the aircraft.
Richard protested furiously, refusing to move until he was physically escorted off the plane. His once confident swagger dissolved into humiliation as passengers erupted into applause, not just for his removal, but for the bravery of the little girl who had stood there with unwavering dignity. Emily was finally seated by her window, where she leaned against the glass, watching the sunlight shimmer on the tarmac. Jessica touched her shoulder gently, whispering that she was proud.
But Emily simply nodded, her eyes distant yet serene. She wasn't proud of the man's downfall. She was sad that kindness had been rejected so easily.
Even at her age, she understood something profound. True wealth is not measured in money, but in the respect you give others.
And in that moment, her silent strength had taught everyone on that plane a lesson far more valuable than gold.
As the plane finally prepared for takeoff, the passengers carried more than just their luggage with them. They carried the memory of a little girl who showed them what dignity looks like in its purest form. Many would go home and tell their families about the child in the white dress, the daughter of a man whose fortune meant nothing compared to the richness of her heart.
As the plane soared into the sky that day, Emily leaned her head against the window, the clouds stretching endlessly beneath her. To everyone else, she was a billionaire's daughter who had just endured public humiliation.
But to those who truly saw her, she was something far greater. A living reminder that respect, once given, can elevate even the smallest voice into something that grounds the world itself.